What's happening? It's your boy, Matty Milligan, and this is the Underground Marketing Conspiracy, episode number 12, where today we are talking about the 12-month millionaire. So, this is something I heard almost 2 years ago at this point, where there was some dude who, in the early 90s, some 19-year-old kid that made over 100,000 or sorry, $100 million selling supplements with direct mail. And I'd heard about it and it sounded very suspicious and not very believable. So I heard about it again a few months later, and it was at a live presentation, and they were talking about this same guy, and they mentioned his name was Vincent James. And after that, I wrote down his name and I tried to find out little pieces of content about him. And then finally, I recently discovered this interview series where it's about, I would say, 3 or 4 hours long of interviews where they're interviewing this guy. And essentially it starts out where he's like, "Oh, I was 19 years old and I moved to the West Coast and I need to make money, and the only thing I could get was a job, and I hated the interviews, and I could only get jobs usually at about $4 or $5 an hour." And so instead of doing that, this guy decides to look into making a little bit of money. So he's like, "Oh, you know what? I'll sell some car stereos." So that's what he starts doing, and he talks about how he had to basically make up this kind of very strange, not legit business name just to get in touch with these distributors to actually be able to sell the products that he would be selling. So he does this, and then he figures out a way where he's like, "Oh, you know what? I'll just advertise in these magazines." And it was very frustrating because he would put in an ad and then it wouldn't launch for 3 months. And essentially, he would try and test as inexpensively as possible for how much money he could make. So instead of doing that, because it took so long, he went to these people that he was buying all these ads from on a consistent basis, still making a bit of money. Realistically, the ads at this point were profitable, where I think he was getting like a 1.5 like pull rate, which means that for the amount that he sends out, he's making a very small amount of money. But one of the big lessons that I'll talk about in a minute is that with advertising, if you have your break even point, that's the ideal situation with what are known as front end funnels. And I'll talk about more about front end versus front end funnels in the future, and I'll talk about this in a minute, in fact. But he would send out these letters, and it took him so long. So he's like, or he would advertise in magazines that he's like, "Hey, do you have a mailing list?" And they'd be like, "Oh, yes." And then he would take their mailing list and just write these direct mail pieces, mail orders, and mail it out. Similar to all the classic mail order direct response marketers that have existed over the last probably 50 to 60 years. But that's what he did. And he would test it out in one magazine and then with one list. And then if it would pull, he would test out another one. And then if he would really test out about 1,000 letters is what he would initially send out. And from there, once he got that response rate back, he would see if he was actually profitable or making money. And I think he said with his first campaign, he sent out 3 letters and 2 of them bombed and one of them broke even. So he worked on that, really worked on tweaking it over and over and over for a few months. And then essentially at some point, he figured out a way to make it profitable with specifically his phone in. Because I think he said he tried to originally get people to phone in and then he would have the order taker over the phone, which he did differentiate from a salesperson. The order taker, which is basically just a customer service rep, they would just take the order and he would try and get them to upsell. And people wouldn't take the upsell ever because they just wanted to try out the product initially. So he found that actually bundling it, and eventually he tried some sort of subscription model and then that worked, and then that turned into essentially $100 million business. And he talks about how inexpensive it is to actually manufacture a lot of these supplements, where he was getting these bottles made for anywhere from $2 to $4 per bottle. And he actually said that it cost more to get the stamp maker for the labels to be printed onto the actual bottles of the supplements. It was more expensive to make that than it was the actual bottles themselves. So that's one thing that I would a lot of people are like, oh, it's a lot to start a business, but even if you think about it, and I think he said the minimum order was, I think, 400 pieces to get something like that. It really doesn't necessarily cost that much to start the business, right? In fact, that initial order that would cost what, $2,500, and then to do all the marketing, that would cost probably the most. So that's how you really start a supplement business, right? You don't even necessarily need to buy this product in advance. You can buy it and then want the profits white labeling. He did talk a lot about merchant fees as well. So merchant fees and getting a merchant account. He was talking about using PayPal to sell supplements. I don't even think you can do that these days, but he did talk about something which is a big issue with selling online and just accepting credit cards in general, which is merchant accounts. And this is something that you really don't want to screw up with, because you want to be able to always accept credit cards online. And maybe you're not familiar with these things called chargebacks. Chargebacks is when a customer places an order and then later on they look at their credit card and like, oh, I don't remember this order. Or in some cases, the customer may not be honest and they just try and do the chargeback. And what happens is the merchant is the one who ends up paying for this. So they have to refund the money, plus they get a small fee deducted as well. And this is with all merchant accounts. And essentially what happens is you're monitored even further. One thing he talked about too is he's like, I would always get my merchant account put, I would get it frozen, and then they would hold the money for 90 to 180 days. And I've seen this happen time and time again. And basically, in some cases, he knew people where they would just go out of business because of that one event, where especially when you would have a sudden surge in huge amount of sales. And they're like, and these credit card gateways, what they'll tell you is, oh yeah, you can keep accepting the money because they're still going to make their money. If you're making sales, like, yeah, whatever, but you're not going to get the money in the end. So you're not getting any of that cash flow, but they're still making their credit card fees off of the order. So those are the situations where it's like, man, do I refund and just declare bankruptcy? Those are super frustrating situations that I've seen for tons of entrepreneurs, like hundreds and if not thousands of times I've seen this with people when I'm talking to them about this. And it's a big issue. So this is something again where you have to be smart with managing each of your orders, and maybe even hire someone, implement some sort of process where your team, your finance team, your customer service team goes through these orders and makes sure that all of them are legitimate orders, right? Matching the billing and shipping address, making sure those two are the same. Those ones usually require a callback. Shipping to random countries that aren't in US or Canada or the UK or Australia, those are high risk orders, right? And the benefit is there's a lot of apps you can use and third party software where they'll show you the threat detection right away based on their algorithm. So it could be an IP where there's been other fraudulent orders placed in the past, or just specific addresses that have been used, certain email addresses. All these companies keep track of this stuff, and this is why anytime you're worried as a customer about not getting your money back, it's honestly, you have nothing to worry about, to be honest, because you just call up your credit card company, they process the chargeback. And again, if you're one of these people where you're an actual fraudster and you go out and you try and process all of these orders, then eventually someone's going to find out, and then you're never going to be able to open up a merchant account ever again on any of these gateways. But it's one thing where you always want to kind of aim for a below 1% with your chargebacks. One thing too is when you look at your cost per acquisition for your customers, and there's this other e-commerce dude that I talk about who mentions this, is that when you're actually when you're calculating what your average cart value is, and then you're subtracting what your profit's going to be, you need to subtract your ad spend, you need to subtract your, what is it, cost per goods sold, aka COGS. You need to subtract all your shipping fees, you need to subtract the product cost itself, which I think was the COGS cost, but sorry. And And then there was, what was the last one? And then there's your refund rate, which is a specific percentage, and then finally the chargeback rate. So that's how much it costs you to fulfill your actual product. So basically, on when you're calculating that, that chargeback fee is something you need to add into how much money your business is actually going to make that much year in terms of revenue and profit when you're basically doing your year over year growth. But back to the 12-month millionaire, I haven't listened to this. I've only listened to, I think, the first hour or so of the interview, which is super interesting so far. And this guy, Vincent James, also talks about how the two best businesses, if he were to start them, were supplements. He probably says this because it's made him tons of money, or he would sell, what was the other one? Information products, because the fulfillment on those is very inexpensive because you can fulfill them and just deliver them right away in a lot of cases to people. So, whereas other things like supplements, because there's been so many fraudulent businesses in the past that, and because the claims are a little bit sketchier, that information products, you won't have any issues with your merchant account. But the 12-month millionaire, I think, is a very cool concept as well, because I would say that a lot of people out there want to become millionaires, and it could take you a year, that's for sure. It would probably take you a little bit longer, to be honest, but it usually takes about 12 months from when you really have that big idea. I personally am not there yet, but it's something where, again, I'm looking for kind of my own big idea that I can really go with and then just roll with to hit that kind of millionaire within a year. So it does take some planning though, right? And it's one thing, I think I've talked about this before, where if someone were to ask me what are the steps to building $1 million funnel, from all the ones that I've analyzed, it looks like there's kind of that all that pre-funnel where it's coming up with the big idea, finding a really hot market, creating an awesome offer, and then once you have all that set up, from there, then you go out and actually figure out which sales funnel or web pages you're going to throw up. And then from there, you figure out what your follow up sequence is going to look like in terms of emails or SMS text follow up or messenger bots, whatever your follow up structure is going to look like. That's something that you need to have in place as well as building the web pages, which a lot of people don't do from what I've seen. And then finally, from there, it's like, okay, now that we have this piece built, how are we going to get visitors and web traffic to these web pages so people opt in and so we can actually make money? And then once all that's in place, again, it really just comes into systems. You figure out the best systems to optimize it and really automate the process. I don't like the word automate, but just to, I guess, speed things up. And then finally, the last thing is just the teams, right? Putting the right people into place and getting yourself out of the business. The old saying that they talk about, what is it? You don't want to be working in your business, you want to be working on your business. Very classic entrepreneurship cliche, but it's definitely rings true. And the only way to really get to that 12-month millionaire is through that passage. From what I've seen, the path from 7 figures to 8 figures and 8 to 10 are completely different. It looks like the first three parts, again, probably that creating that purple cow offer in the blue ocean and then building a funnel around that and then getting traffic to that, that is more the millionaire stage. The systems and teams, those are really the 8 to 9 $2 billion businesses. So that's essentially kind of what the 12-month millionaire is. It's really just getting you to that $1 million thing. And then again, 12 months after that, that's when you can work on $1 to $10 million in sales. So that's really what I would recommend. I really recommend this book, The 12-Month Millionaire. You can actually buy it's like a super thick copy that you can actually buy this. I'm going to get it at some point so I can add it to my copywriting book collection and marketing book collection in general. But I really wanted to focus on that today. What I might do is share more tips as I go through this. Maybe I'll do a part 2 of this tomorrow. But I wanted to just share my insights on this whole 12-month millionaire idea because it seems totally doable. Again, so if you're thinking about it, it's late 2019 at this point. If you're planning out building an awesome life and you're tired of where you're at, I think that we're about to step into 2020. So I don't know what they're going to call these, the 20s. I think the 2000 to 2009 was the O's, and then 2010 to 2019 was the teens, and now it's the 20s. But we already have the 1920s, so I'm not sure what people are going to call it. But if you want to make those next 10 years awesome, then you need to really just start saving now at this point. Maybe not spending so much over the holidays, and really just saving up a little bit to start investing in your business and really taking a little bit further. Because I've seen so many people where they're dabbling with a lot of ideas, and really it's just coming down to one idea and focusing on scaling that over 12 months to actually hit that $1 million. And again, there's a whole process to go through this. I don't want to talk about this today, but that's really just my 2 cents. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider listening to other episodes that I have. This could be on YouTube or Spotify or SoundCloud or iTunes or TuneIn or iHeartRadio, which I'm working on getting approved for, or any of them. Going back, listening to from the beginning as well, because there are tons of helpful tips. And even consider subscribing if you are watching this video on YouTube. And that is all for today. I will see you next time on the underground marketing conspiracy.